Right in the middle of her wedding vows, my ex-wife stopped. The minister turned toward 200 guests and screamed my name like I just walked in holding a smoking gun. Forks dropped, heads spun. People whispered, "Is Harold here?" I wasn't. I was thousands of miles away sipping cheap Portuguese coffee in a small apartment overlooking the Tagus River. They all thought I'd ruined her day. No. Lydia ruined her whole life. My name is Harold Whitman. I'm 54 years old, born and raised in Rockford, Illinois, the kind of place where the days move slow, the weather moves fast, and everybody knows everybody else's business before breakfast. For 25 years, I worked at Tri-State Credit Union as a loan officer, steady, predictable, the kind of man you could set a clock by. My barber Larry used to joke, "Harold, your hair grows on a schedule. Wish my kids did the same." Lydia, my ex-wife, didn't appreciate predictability. She used to say I was a routine with legs. On bad days, she'd toss out words like boring and stagnant. After 27 years of marriage, she wanted excitement. She wanted adventure. And somehow adventure looked a whole lot like a guy named Travis Hale. Travis was younger than me, 46 tan, stylish in that overly polished way that tells you the man spends more time tanning than working. He called himself an entrepreneur, which is usually code for no steady income. Lydia talked about him the way high school girls talk about boys with motorcycles. She called him her perfect man, and she couldn't wait to divorce me so she could chase after her new fairy tale. Funny thing is, the last time Lydia called me predictable was the same week I found out Travis had 2 bankruptcies and an arrest warrant in Nevada. Predictable men read the fine print. Travis never did. The divorce came fast and I didn't fight it. I didn't need to. In Illinois, if both parties agree, the whole process slides through quicker than you'd expect. She got her car, her clothes, and whatever savings were left in the small account under her name. I got the house she called a shoebox for a man with no imagination. And that was fine by me. I like shoeboxes. They keep out the wind. But I made sure the separation agreement was airtight. I closed all our joint accounts, separated every financial thread that tied us together, installed a legal wall so solid you could have built a Midwest tornado shelter with it. I didn't take more than the law allowed, but I made sure not a penny of my future would be tied to her past. It was boring, meticulous work and my first quiet victory. When the papers were signed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: stillness. Clean, quiet stillness. The kind only people over 50 really appreciate. The kind that sneaks up on you when the TV's off and the house isn't full of arguments or sighs or the feeling of walking on eggshells. About 3 weeks after the divorce finalized, I was offered a 1-year contract job in Lisbon, Portugal. One of our longtime credit union partners was opening a satellite office overseas and needed someone seasoned, someone steady to train their loan team. Steady was the first compliment I'd heard in months. I took the job. I figured a year abroad would either fix me or at least give me something else to think about besides Lydia's perfume and the way she slammed cabinet doors. Lisbon was a surprise. Narrow streets, warm bread, too many hills, friendly people who somehow thought Whitman sounded exotic. My apartment was small but had a balcony facing the river, and every morning the sun hit the water just right, turning it gold for a few seconds. I spent those mornings breathing in the newness of everything, letting the past fall off me like old paint. For a while, I didn't think about Lydia at all. Then one afternoon, while I was standing in line at a tiny cafe in Alfama, my phone buzzed. A message from an old neighbor back in Rockford. "You hear the news, Lydia's getting married this Saturday." Attached was a photo of Lydia and Travis smiling like 2 people who just won the lottery instead of 2 people standing on a financial sinkhole. I stared at the picture, not sure whether to laugh or shake my head. There she was, wearing a dress way too white for someone who'd instigated a divorce 3 months earlier. And Travis, he looked like he'd borrowed every piece of his outfit from a man too rich to notice what was missing from his closet. The comments on the post were worse. "She finally upgraded. She deserves this. True love always finds a way." Rockford folks love to gossip, and they love a good underdog story, except sometimes they cheer for the wrong dog. I set the phone down, took a sip of coffee, and smiled to myself. People forget that predictable men, boring men, have quiet advantages. We plan, we prepare, and we notice what others ignore. So while everyone else saw her perfect new beginning, I saw the foundation cracks. Travis wasn't the fairy tale. He was the fine print. And Lydia, she didn't know it yet, but she just sprinted headfirst into her own disaster. I knew I wasn't going to the wedding, and I certainly wasn't going to interrupt it. That wasn't my style, but I also knew that with a man like Travis standing at the altar, it wouldn't take much for the truth to find its way into the spotlight. All it needed was a little nudge. And predictable old Harold Whitman had already set one in motion long before Lydia picked out her dress. I landed back in Rockford on a Thursday evening, 2 days before my niece Emily's high school graduation. Lisbon had loosened me up a bit, different air, different people, but the moment I stepped into the terminal at Chicago O'Hare, everything Midwest about me snapped right back into place. The flat vowels, the windbreaker I'd owned since 2009, the instinct to hold the door for strangers who wouldn't say thank you. It all returned like muscle memory. By the time I drove my old Ford Escape into Rockford, the sun had dipped behind the strip malls, leaving a soft orange glow reflecting off the windows of the TJ Maxx. The same pothole on Harrison Avenue was still there, still ready to wreck a decent pair of shocks. Home, sweet home. My sister Carol, different Carol than the one in this story later, had a roast in the oven when I walked into her house. "Harold, you look thinner," she said, hugging me like she was checking for broken bones. "Lisbon must feed you less pork." "Lisbon feeds me just fine," I told her. "I walk more now. Hills everywhere." "Well, don't get too thin. You'll start looking like one of those Europeans who wear scarves in July." Her husband Mike chuckled from the living room. "Hey, Harold, your ex-wife's big day is Saturday. You going?" "No," I said, simply hanging up my jacket. Mike snorted. "Good, I wouldn't either." We ate, talked, and I pretended not to notice the way Carol studied my face like she was trying to measure whether I was emotionally intact. People always assume divorce rips you in half, but sometimes it frees you so quietly, you don't even realize the weight is gone until weeks later. The next morning I drove into town to pick up a graduation card and a few things for Carol. Rockford still smelled the way it always did, some mix of car exhaust, river water, and bakery air that drifted from Henderson's on Main Street. When I walked into the bakery, Mrs. Henderson herself stood behind the counter. She's been selling donuts and unsolicited opinions for 40 years. "Well, I'll be," she said, leaning across the glass case. "Harold Whitman, back from Europe." "Just visiting," I said. She handed me a small cup of coffee before I even asked. "Now I heard your ex is getting married tomorrow," she said, lowering her voice like she was about to share nuclear codes. "Bless her heart." In the Midwest, bless her heart can mean pity, judgment, amusement, or all three at once. Here it meant that woman doesn't know what she's doing. I thanked her for the coffee and stepped outside. Rockford gossip spreads faster than wildfire in a dry season, so it didn't surprise me that Lydia's wedding was the hottest topic in town. Next stop was Tri-State Credit Union. Even though I'd been gone for months, my key card still worked. They hadn't had time to deactivate it. They never do things fast there. The first person I ran into was Mrs. Kowalski, our teller, who had been there for 38 years and somehow knew the financial history of everyone in town without ever breaking confidentiality rules. She spotted me before I spotted her. "Danny," she whispered loudly. "She's called me Danny since I was 29. Get over here." I joined her in the break room, and she closed the door like we were entering a safe house. "You hear about that Hale fella?" she asked, eyes widening. "Travis. The one your ex is marrying." "I've heard a little," I said. "Well, let me tell you, in the last month, that man tried to open 6 credit cards. 6. And every single one got denied. His debt-to-income ratio is uglier than my cousin's second divorce." I raised an eyebrow. 6. 6, she repeated, holding up fingers that shook with indignation. "And last week he asked about a personal loan. Wanted $10,000. Said it was for a business expansion. Honey, he couldn't expand a balloon." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Thanks for the info." She leaned in. "Harold, that man's drowning. And your ex-wife, she's tying herself to an anchor." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Mrs. Kowalski nodded knowingly and patted my arm in that motherly way only women over 60 can get away with. When I got back to my sister's house, there was an envelope waiting on the porch. Thick paper. Embossed. Fancy. Lydia had never been fancy when she lived with me, so this was clearly Travis's influence, or Travis's cousin's influence, considering his living situation. I opened it. "You are respectfully invited to the union of Lydia Ann Whitman and Travis Lee Hale." Inside, a handwritten note. "Closure matters, Harold. It would mean a lot if you saw what true happiness looks like. I let out one short breath through my nose, not quite a laugh, more like a disbelief exhale. Lydia always did have a flair for dramatic lines she didn't fully understand. I didn't intend to go to the wedding. I didn't even intend to be in the same zip code at the time of the ceremony, but I did intend to send a little something to the people who deserve to know the truth. I prepared 2 envelopes that night. One went to the best man, someone I barely knew, but who had friended me on Facebook years ago because we both liked the Chicago Bears. The other went to Aunt Jolene Barrett, Lydia's loud, unfiltered, and notoriously nosy aunt, who had no problem speaking her mind at every holiday dinner we ever had. If there was anyone capable of detonating the truth at a wedding, it was Jolene. Inside both envelopes was a carefully organized packet. Travis's bankruptcy filings, details of his Nevada arrest, screenshot prints of messages to other women, a debt statement totaling $187,000. I didn't add explanations. I didn't need to. Paper speaks for itself. The next morning, I received a text while eating toast in my sister's kitchen. Unknown number, dude, is all this real? Attached was a photo of my own packet sitting on a table covered in groomsmen ties. I took a sip of coffee and typed one word back. Yes, Saturday arrived with the kind of warm Midwest breeze that tricks you into thinking summer will be gentle that year. Birds were chirping, lawns were being mowed, and across Rockford, Illinois, 200 people were dressing up for the wedding of Lydia Ann Whitman and Travis Lee Hale. I wasn't one of them. I spent the early morning sitting on my sister's back porch with a cup of black coffee, listening to the cicadas groan like old men stretching after a long nap. Graduation wasn't until the afternoon, so I had time to watch the neighborhood wake up, the passing trucks, the kids biking to the park. The mailman who moved like time had no authority over him. It was peaceful, and peaceful is a feeling you learn to treasure at my age. Around 10:30, I got the first message. It was a photo, an aisle lined with white folding chairs under a big billowing tent behind St. Joseph Church Hall. The kind of tent Rockford rented for every wedding anniversary and graduation party for the last 20 years. Lydia stood near the altar, glowing with the kind of nervous excitement that comes before a show or a disaster. Below the picture was a caption, "Showtime." I didn't recognize the number, so I ignored it. But I didn't ignore the feeling. The quiet electricity that tells you a storm is forming somewhere, even if the sky above you is clear. I set the phone down and finished my coffee. Back at St. Joseph, guests were filtering in, wearing everything from sequined dresses to suits that still had department store creases. That's Midwest weddings for you. Half the room is overdressed, and the other half looks like they stumbled in from a hardware store sale. The tent smelled of hydrangeas, Costco perfume, and VFW catered pulled pork warming in trays near the back. Lydia loved anything that felt upscale, but she also loved saving $1, a strange combination in a woman chasing a fantasy. Travis looked nervous. Grooms often do, but his wasn't the typical cold feet jitter. His eyes darted around like a man scanning for creditors, and I suppose in a way he was. Then came Aunt Jolene Barrett. Her floral dress looked like it had fought the 70s and won. Her hair was teased so high it could have had its own zip code, and she walked with the brisk confidence of someone who had decided she wasn't afraid of consequences today. Because Aunt Jolene had my packet in her purse, the whole thing, papers sticking out like sharp little truth edges. According to one of the guests, who would later send me voice messages for 6 straight minutes describing the scene Jolene had been reading before the ceremony. Not her Bible, not her program, my packet. Lydia, meanwhile, was doing final touch-ups on her makeup, practicing the smile she'd been rehearsing for months. The look at me now, Harold smile. The eye traded up smile. The smile built on a lie she didn't even know she was living. Then the ceremony began. Soft music from a Bluetooth speaker. Guests fanning themselves with programs. Travis sweating through his rented tux. Lydia walking down the aisle like she was stepping onto the set of a reality show she believed she deserved. And in the second row, Aunt Jolene stood up. Not slowly, not politely. She just rose like a judge entering a courtroom. She held her champagne glass high, yes, she'd brought one with her, and cleared her throat. What follows is what half of Rockford heard before the end of the day. Jolene's voice boomed across the tent. Lydia Ann Whitman. Every guest turned. You sure you want to marry a man who owes $187,000? Gasps scattered through the air like popcorn. And still lives in his cousin's basement. Then silence. Silence so heavy you could have heard a fork drop on the grass outside the tent. Guests froze. A couple of kids stopped chasing each other and stared wide-eyed at the adults, suddenly forgetting how breathing worked. The minister lowered his booklet as if he wasn't sure whether to continue or call for security. And Lydia, she went pale, not embarrassed pale, not cold pale, but truth crashing into the bedroom, windows pale. Her mouth opened and closed without sound like a fish pulled out of water too fast. Then Travis made his move. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He didn't even scold Jolene. He just bolted. Ran straight down the side aisle past the buffet table, past a stunned usher holding a basket of rose petals, and out through the flap of the tent like a guilty raccoon caught raiding a cooler. A few guests started whispering. Is this real? Did Harold do this, who lives in a cousin's basement at 46? Oh Lord, someone film this. Lydia snapped back into motion, dropping her bouquet and yelling, Travis, Travis, come back here. What is this? Who did this? But she didn't chase him. She grabbed her phone. Of course she did. And she dialed me. I was sitting in my sister's living room helping Mike fix a crooked shelf when the phone buzzed. Lydia. I let it ring twice before answering. I don't know why. Maybe for dramatic effect. Maybe because I wanted to hear the static of humiliation on the line. When I finally answered, she didn't say hello. Harold, she hissed. Where are you? In Rockford, I said, calm as a lake in winter. Did you do this? Did you send something? Did you talk to Jolene? I leaned back against the wall looking at a framed photo of my niece in her marching band uniform. You invited me to your wedding, Lydia, I said. You wanted me to see what real happiness looks like. Seems like everyone saw something today. She cursed under her breath. Something crashed behind her, maybe a folding chair, maybe her pride. You ruined my wedding. No, I said evenly. I didn't ruin anything. And I let that hang in the air. Because the truth was simple, Lydia's life had been falling apart long before I mailed a packet. I just let gravity finish the job. I didn't expect to see Lydia in person before flying back to Lisbon. After her wedding exploded like a 4th of July firecracker in a dry field, I figured she'd hole up somewhere, maybe at her sister's place, maybe at the cousin's basement Travis used to occupy before sprinting out of the tent like a man fleeing the IRS. But Lydia has always surprised me, not in good ways, but in bold ones. The morning after the wedding I drove to Beatty's Family Diner, the same place where I'd eaten meatloaf for 20 years. The place where they still cook hash browns on a griddle older than most of the staff. The place where the waitresses call you sweetheart, even after telling you your toast is burnt. I slid into a booth near the window, ordered my usual black coffee, scrambled eggs, wheat toast. Simple, predictable, comforting. Outside cars rolled down East State Street, their tires humming on the pavement. Inside, the air smelled like bacon grease and warm maple syrup. A couple of retirees argued about baseball near the front. A young mom was trying unsuccessfully to get her toddler to stop shaking a packet of sugar like a maraca. Life was ordinary, beautifully ordinary. I had just finished buttering my toast when the bell over the door jingled loud enough to make heads turn. Lydia walked in. Hair slightly frizzy, makeup, smudged eyes red, like she'd cried until the sun rose. She wore the same dress from yesterday minus the veil and carried her phone in a death grip. She spotted me instantly. Her shoulders stiffened. Her jaw clenched. Then she marched straight toward my booth, heels clicking like accusations. Harold, she said, voice trembling. I didn't stand up. Didn't even put down my coffee. Morning, Lydia. You did this. Her voice cracked. You sent something to Jolene, didn't you? The waitress Linda, a woman in her 60s with a beehive hairdo and a permanent nicotine rasp, paused at my table. Everything all right here, hon? I nodded, just talking. Lydia's breath hitched. She slid into the booth across from me without asking. You humiliated me, she said louder than she should have. In front of everyone I know, in front of my parents, my co-workers, my church group. Do you understand that? I took a slow sip of coffee. I understand you're upset. Upset, Harold, I was left at the altar, in a tent behind a church. That's worse than being dumped at a courthouse. People filmed it. It's probably online already. A few diners were very obviously pretending not to listen. In Rockford, pretending not to eavesdrop means staring directly at your pancakes while leaning an inch too close. I waited until Lydia stopped to breathe. Then instead of answering her question, I asked one of my own. Why did you really come here, Lydia? Her lip trembled. She looked down at the table. I just don't understand. Travis said he told me he promised things. He said he was starting a company. He said he had investors. He said we would travel. He said whatever he needed to. She flinched. And she whispered, you didn't try to stop any of it. You just let me walk away, like I didn't matter. There it was, not anger, not humiliation. Loneliness. It always finds a way to show itself sooner or later. But I didn't offer pity, not this time, not after everything. You made your choice, I said quietly, a long time ago. Lydia wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Harold, can we start over? Just talk. Can we maybe try again? I set my coffee down. Then I delivered the lines I had kept tucked in my chest since the moment she'd called me boring, with a mouth still warm from Travis's kisses. I leaned in, just slightly lowering my voice so she had to lean in too. Lydia, you didn't leave me for a better man, I said softly. You left me for a better story. Turns out the story was fiction, and now you're holding the bill. Her face twisted, confusion, anger, realization, all colliding at once. The diner went silent. Even the toddler stopped banging the sugar packet. I let the quiet stretch, a long, slow pause that weighed more than any argument we'd ever had. Lydia opened her mouth, but before she could speak, I reached into my jacket pocket. I set a folder on the table. Do you know what this is? I asked. She stared at it like it might bite her. Another packet of Travis's lies. No, I slid it toward her. This one's about me. She hesitated, then opened the folder with shaky fingers. The first page was a closing statement. The house, I said, the one you told me to keep because you never liked it anyway. Remember? She swallowed. I finished the basement, put in that back deck you always wanted, had the kitchen redone, listed it last month. Her eyes scanned the numbers. Her breath caught. After taxes, I cleared $312,000. She choked on a small gasp. That check is already deposited. I paused, letting the weight of it settle. In a Portuguese bank account. Another pause. With only my name on it. Lydia shut the folder abruptly, pressing her palms over it, like she could smother the truth printed inside. Harold, she whispered, barely audible, you sold the house. I did. And you didn't think to tell me it wasn't your house anymore. She blinked fast, tears forming. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I slid out of the booth, picked up my jacket, and laid a $10 bill beside my plate, even though Linda hadn't given me the check yet. As I stood, Lydia reached for my wrist, not tightly but desperately. Harold, please, don't leave like this. I gently pulled my arm away. I already left Lydia. You just didn't notice until today. I walked toward the door. The bell jingled overhead as I stepped out into the warm morning air. Behind me through the diner window, I saw Lydia sitting alone in the booth, the folder still resting in front of her, like a headstone marking the grave of all her plans. Outside, a breeze moved through the parking lot, carrying the faint smell of fresh-cut grass and car exhaust. I breathed in, and for the first time in a long time, I felt absolutely quietly free. The next morning, before the sun climbed above the rooftops of Rockford, I found myself awake earlier than usual. Maybe it was the jet lag. Maybe it was the events of the last 2 days replaying like an old VHS tape in the back of my mind. Or maybe it was something simpler, a sense of finality settling in my chest, gentle but solid, like the last piece of a puzzle snapping into place. I sat on the edge of the guest bed at my sister's house, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the muted tick of a hallway clock that had been in the family for 3 decades. The house smelled faintly of last night's roast and lemon dish soap. Ordinary smells, familiar ones. The kind that remind you life doesn't stop when everything else does. My flight back to Lisbon wasn't until late afternoon, so I took a slow drive through Rockford, past the old fire station, past the park where Lydia and I once pushed our niece on the swings, past the credit union where I'd spent half my adult life explaining loan terms to people who needed someone steady to guide them. I didn't stop anywhere. I just let the city pass by my windows, each turn closing a door I no longer needed open. Around 10, I parked near the Rock River and got out. The air was already warming, carrying the earthy smell of water and summer grass. Ducks glided across the surface like they owned the place. A couple on bicycles passed behind me. Someone across the river was fishing, though by the slumped posture, I doubted they were catching anything. I stood there for a long minute, hands in my pockets, feeling the slow-moving current tug at the corners of my thoughts. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister, just checking on you. Breakfast is in the fridge if you want it. Proud of you. Another buzz, a different number this time. I almost didn't look. I didn't want to reopen the emotional door I'd closed yesterday at Beatty's Diner. But curiosity has a funny way of tapping you on the shoulder. A photo appeared, a blurry shot of someone in a bright orange vest at the Shell station on Alpine Road. He was cleaning windshields head down, shoulders slumped. It didn't take more than a half second to recognize him. Travis. Below the photo was a message. Told you he was trouble. You picked a good time to leave, kid. Aunt Jolene. I couldn't help it, I laughed. A quiet, warm laugh that surprised even me. Leave it to Aunt Jolene to deliver the final chapter in the most unfiltered way possible. I sent her back a simple thumbs-up emoji. It felt like enough. By noon, I was back at my sister's place packing my bag. Mike wandered into the guest room and leaned against the doorframe. You ready to head back across the ocean, he asked. I am, I said, folding the last shirt. He nodded thoughtfully. Well, just know we're proud of you. You handled all this better than most men would have. I shrugged, a small smile forming. Predictable men make predictable exits. He chuckled. Nothing wrong with predictable. Predictable pays the bills. I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder. Mike gave me a pat on the back, firm and brotherly, and took the suitcase down the stairs for me, like he always used to when I'd visit. We said our goodbyes at the curb. Rockford's midday sun glinted off the hood of the Uber that came to pick me up. I took one last look at my sister's house, the small front porch, with the wind chimes, the cracked driveway, the old maple tree we planted as kids. Everything looked the same, yet I felt completely different. The ride to O'Hare was uneventful. Highway traffic, cornfields rolling into the distance, glimpses of small towns that looked like copies of each other, church, diner, gas station, repeat. There's a comfort in that pattern, a Midwest rhythm that beats steady even when everything else tries to pull you off course. When I boarded the plane and settled into my seat, a calm washed over me. Not the calm of denial or avoidance, the calm of closure, the calm of a man who walked through fire and came out cleaner on the other side. 9 hours later, Lisbon unfolded beneath the plane, a patchwork of terracotta rooftops, winding streets, and sunlit water. The moment we landed, I felt the shift. Not just the geographical one, but the internal one. Like I had stepped from one chapter fully into another. My apartment was just as I'd left it, quiet, small, filled with soft morning light drifting through sheer curtains. I opened the balcony door and stepped outside, the air warm and salted. The Tagus River stretched wide and calm, the city humming gently behind me. I made a cup of coffee, strong, dark, a little too bitter, and sat at the small table overlooking the water. Then, without forcing it, without chasing it, the thought came. Real revenge isn't loud. It isn't a scene or a scream or a plate thrown across a room. Real revenge is waking up every morning knowing you're free, while the people who tried to break you are stuck living with the mess they made. I took a slow sip of coffee, the steam brushing my face, the sunlight warming my hands. Ships drifted across the river like lazy giants. A seagull perched on a nearby railing, cocking its head at me like it wanted to hear the rest of the story. I smiled. Some mornings, I said softly, you just sit by the Tagus River and smile. If you've ever walked away from the wrong person, really walked away, you know exactly what I mean. And if stories like this make you feel a little less alone or a little more understood, feel free to stick around. Share your own story. Subscribe if you want more. I'll be here, coffee in hand, watching the river drift by.